What are we talking about? We're talking about how to get promoted or how to secure a merit increase. And we're going to go into that deep. Okay. We're going to talk about what's happening. And the question is, how do I even know about this stuff? How can I possibly have the insight? Because guess what? Years ago at another job, I actually was a manager. I managed other people and I gained keen insight into the process. And I want you to understand what that process is. What's going on? How do they decide these kinds of things? That way you can be steering the process. And this isn't a sneaky hack. This isn't a trick. This is more like finding out what do I need to be doing? What is this that I could be doing such that I'm helping to meet their needs and that they can, meet my needs in a sense. So if you're here, before we get going, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. I don't want you to miss anything if we do a future show. Now, there's this thing that goes on every year. I put some banners up here. Do you know what it is? There's this little meeting that happens every year. And it's where basically all the managers get together and they're trying to figure out, in a sense, they have to plan multiple things. They need to look at all the different departments, all the people on the staff, and they have to affect change on a people management level. But one of the things they need to deal with is, well, here's what the company made this year. We've paid all the bills. We've satisfied all of our debts for this year. Now we have some money left over. This includes we've paid everybody's salaries, we've doled out any equities, what have you, and they have a little bit left over. And now they're going to decide who are they going to give it to. This is something I learned about when I became, the company I used to work at, not Spring Team. I never really was a manager over there, but another outfit, we had a thing called a group leader. So you had the person that told you, they gave you your marching orders, your tech leader or your tech lead. Okay. I did have a role doing that. I had 7 people working for me who had to implement various solutions to stuff. Okay. That's when I was a tech leader, but they also made me what was called a group leader. I had to give people annual reviews. I had to give them performance feedback. I had to tell them, hey, you did great here. Here's something where you can improve upon, that kind of stuff. That at that company, they called it a group leader. At your shop, they may call that something else. That may just be what's called a manager. That doesn't really matter. It's the same idea. There's somebody who's watching your activities. Their job is to interact with you. They're the liaison between you and whatever the senior management is. So there's a sense that they need to implement stuff, but they need to have all the teams active and operational. So that's what your manager is. Okay. But then at a certain point, I found out they came to me and said, okay, Greg, it's time to come to the group leaders annual meeting. And I'm like, what meeting? So they told me I needed to come in and I had to bring my list of department people. Because essentially, or the people that reported to me, and in our whole department, we were going to decide how everybody ranked against everybody else. We had to figure out, well, this person performed spectacularly, give them a bigger piece of the merit increase. This person did all right, give them some of it. And this person over here, well, didn't do quite as well as everybody else. So they're going to get a little bit less. Now, the early days, way back in the 90s, ancient history, right? Back then, they called that stacking. They actually, for a nice cloud era with all our SaaS tools, back then it was bring each person on a separate card, like an index card, write all your names, stack them up. And then basically you sat around a table with all the other managers and said, who's your top candidate? And you played your card. And then between all the people put forth, they said, well, this person beats that person. I mean, this person clearly implemented more than that person, that kind of stuff. You'd haggle over it. That may sound really distasteful to you. If you're repulsed at this idea, I understand. Smash the like button if that's your thing, or throw on a comment if you're like, at the thought of that. Okay. I understand. The whole thing is I want you to understand what's happening, because now I'm going to tell you how to affect change in that process. And what I'm trying to tell you is this is what your manager is doing at the meeting, in a sense. Now, a long time ago, they used cards. And so you go there. You'd play the card, you'd compare, you'd sort it out. If your card got picked up and say, okay, we agree on that person, we'll put that person down next. So they would put that person, they'd put the card over here. Then you got the next one in your stack. Then on the next go around, you play your stack. And essentially, bit by bit, everybody in the department would get interleaved in, and we'd have the order from best to worst. I hate saying worse, but on a relative scale, that's what that is. I watched them alter the process. I watched them change the name of the process because, at one point they called it stacking. They may have called it something else before I ever got there. But fundamentally, it's what you're doing. You're figuring out who is the best and who was, well, not the best. Okay. And so we do that. But on a fundamental level, basically, the management team this is the choice the management team has put before them. They have a pot of money, whatever the amount is that they can dole out to everybody, and they have all the people in that department. And essentially, they can either hand everybody an equal share or a not equal share. There's different companies do it differently. Different companies call it something different. They can have their own methods of doing that, how they're going to figure it out, how are they going to vote and decide. But there's a fundamental understanding of this is what's going on. They're figuring out how much to give everybody. So essentially, in my company, I watched them shift to a point where there was too much work for the group leaders to go do that at the same time every year. All the group leaders were kind of pulled off task because every group leader was a developer, or mostly. Either they were a full-time manager also doing this task, or they were developers who were also tasked with doing group leading. And I don't remember getting paid extra to do this. But this is what your manager has to do to go once a year. And what I was saying there a minute ago is they tried to stagger it where they divvied it up, and they would 4 times a year they would rotate, like this quarter of the department is this time of the year, that quarter of the department is done at that time of the year. They tried that. It wasn't effective because nevertheless, you still had to do the stacking process and everybody had to come to that. And there was no point in stacking a quarter of the department at different times of the year. So anyway, they tried to change it. They took it back. I watched it morph, but fundamentally, it's the same thing. And that's what's happening. Now, what is it that they're doing when they, I talked about how they're basically, your manager goes and basically has a card for you. They have a list of your accomplishments. Or do they? What is your manager taking into the meeting? Is your manager going in the meeting to rant against you, to ding you? Is the manager competing against you? What I want to talk about is what you should be doing about this. When your manager's going to the meeting, what your manager is doing is wanting to go in and defend you. Do you think this person wants to go in and sit around a table or sit around a virtual web page or sit in a Slack meeting discussion and get beat out by everybody else? Do you think that looks good for them? If the evidence they're bringing into the meeting doesn't look good for you, it doesn't look good for them either. There's an element of alignment happening here where your manager's needs and your needs kind of line up. The better that you do under this manager, the better it reflects on that manager. They want you to bring them evidence of your accomplishments. They need you to bring them what you've done, okay? This is the thing where if your man, do you ever remember a conversation or a moment where your manager stopped by your office, or they pinged you in a DM on Slack, for example, and said, hey, Greg, I'm going to that. I have to go to this manager of managers meeting at the end of the week. Could you give me some of the stuff that you were able to accomplish this past year? What are some of the key things that you did? And maybe it sounded like nothing more than that. They just said, could you give me the big stuff? Can you give me the stuff that you worked on this past year? Just a summary. They're trying not to intrude on you too much. And you think about it for about 30 seconds and you sit there. Okay, well, let me write down these 3. Well, I don't know. I knocked out a page of tickets last year. I think I implemented a new feature in that component, and I have to roll something out. Here you go. And then you go back to your job because you're like, That's so distracting. I hate having to go spend time and write. Here you go. Here you go, Mr. Manager. Here's the stuff that I did. Do you think your manager wants to come back to you and sit there and pin you down and sit there and say, okay, wait a minute. I need more than that. You got to give me more than that. No, they don't. They probably don't want to confront you. And so they're probably going to take what you've given them and try to see how far they can run with that. They're going to take that list that you got into the meeting with them. And that's what they have to defend you with. You see, I want you to understand, how does that sound from the other side? The list of stuff you gave them is what they're going to take into the meeting to defend you with. That doesn't, what I just described doesn't sound too good, does it? Sounds like I spent 30 seconds on trying to summarize all the key achievements I did last year, and this could play a role in how much merit increase I get or whether I'm qualifying for promotion. I think I would like to put a little more thought into it than that. Now, I've shared this story some ways. I think partly it was in the previous episode of Live Coder Pro Coder Show, and I think I've talked about it in other places. And one of the things I've most keenly put it in, let me put this up here so you can see it, is I'm about to release my new book, 12 Rules for Pro Coders. Go to 12rules.io and check it out, because there's a lot of stuff that's not covered in any university or boot camp program they don't have time to cover. And one of the things is what I'm talking about today. And one of the stories in this book is one that I'm sharing today. And it's really vital that you understand some of the mistakes I made so you don't do them as well. When they initially put me in charge of Spring Data JPA, I think that was back in 2022, I didn't realize how deep and complicated that project was, and I kind of got in over my head at the get-go. It was tricky. It was, and the thing is, I understood relational databases very well. I understood how SQL worked very well. My skill set, Hibernate, was kind of limited, and I was sort of getting buried in stuff, and I was sort of flailing and not affecting enough visual change. You could say I was, I was barely learning. I was learning to keep my head above water. You can debate how much my head was really above water versus underwater, but in the process, I didn't communicate enough with my task leader. I didn't signal that I needed help that would have helped me affect change faster. I didn't quite accomplish enough. And my manager went into that meeting and had very little evidence to defend me with. Amazingly, he had been at the role long enough. He had been involved with the team long enough that he knew what I could do and what I couldn't do. He really knew I had a lot of potential runway here if I could get that out. And so, whereas it looked pretty bad, he did speak on my behalf. But he had barely gotten me, like they're ready to put me at the bottom of the stack that year, okay? At the bottom of the stack. But he had the insight knowing that, at least in that year, the amount of money they had, the size of the department, he knew that if I ended up way at the bottom, there would be zero performative bonus. In some positions, you get a certain piece of bonus paid to you. Some companies do it, some don't, but a lot of bonus payments are performative based. And sometimes in tight years, companies may decide differently. They may say, well, the people in the bottom fifth, the bottom quintile, get zero bonus. He had guessed that was going to be the case that year. So he actually lobbied to get me a little higher up in the stack to where I got part of my bonus. I didn't get it all. I think I got on the order of half of it that year. But he came to me after the meeting. And the thing is, what I didn't realize is that they'd had the meeting. I knew what the meeting was and I knew how it worked, but I didn't realize that they had just had it. So when he came to me and he shared that with me, I knew exactly what had happened because I'd been in those meetings myself. I had given him very little evidence to defend me with. And what that told me was if I kept this up, they surely were not going to give him a second turn at that. Also, I knew that my performance had looked bad on him. It had made it look like he wasn't doing his job to manage me properly. So that's when I jumped into action and I started meeting with him. Not because I was on one of those, a PPE plan or whatever you call that. I wasn't there yet, but I knew that if I didn't get my butt in gear, I might be. So we met, we discussed. For one thing, I apologized to the guy. I mean, he didn't prompt me for that, but I realized I had put him in a bind for him to do that. So I thanked him for also at least pulling that much for me. So I sat down and said, you know, Mr. Manager, what if I start writing a Google Doc and just start writing down everything I'm doing every day? What if I start tracking my tasks? And what if I, and this was not his suggestion, but mine. I said, what if I share it with you so you can just keep a track of what I'm up to? Because I'd realized I hadn't given him much. Earlier, I gave an example, right? I list 3 bullet points of activity in 30 seconds. I don't think I'd quite even given him that much content to defend me with. So what did I do? I started writing down what I was doing every day. If I looked at a ticket, I wrote it down. If I looked at someone's pull request, I wrote it down. I started tracking it on a daily basis. And then whenever I do a check-in with him, I could go quickly look at the list 5 minutes before the meeting. Oh, let me look at all. Hey, here's some big stuff. Here's some key stuff I did. Over here, here's something else I did. And I was able to quickly gather the notes because I can't rely on this memory here to remember every key thing that I did. So instead, I started writing everything down in my own journal, if you will, an engineer's journal. And I wrote it down. And then I could go to him in a meeting and say, here's some of the key stuff I did. Here's some of the other stuff I did. Because something I didn't know was whether or not upper management was asking him for additional feedback. Based on that round of what had happened at the stacking meeting the first time around, it's possible they could have been going to him and wanting to know what's happening. They could be asking for anonymous follow. They could be asking for follow-ups. And they could have gone to him and said, we need a follow-up. Don't tell Greg about it. It's possible. I don't know. But I wanted to feed him information as soon as possible on my efforts. I wanted to build the record. You know what I mean? So I started doing that. And I accidentally discovered a great feature in doing this. Every day I would go to that list. Some days I would falter. It took me a few weeks to kind of get going and making that a habit. Okay. It took some time to make it a habit, but it really paid off. Not because my manager was looking over my shoulder. I was wanting to share this feedback with him. This feedback I'm trying to offer him to be able to give him the inputs that he needs. But I started doing this every day. I would get on here and I'm logging onto my workstation thinking, man, this Spring Data JPA really is complex. Well, JPA is kind of complex. Hibernate, Eclipse Link, what have you. It's complicated. So it was a little amount of dread and like, can I keep up? Sometimes I'm reading code and I'm 7 nested levels in reading something. Well, let me log in. Let me check my worksheet. Wow, I forgot. I closed 5 tickets yesterday. Let me scroll to the day before that. Well, I closed 2 more tickets. Well, I responded to a couple conversations. Oh, I forgot. I retweeted that post about Spring Data. And in about 2 minutes, I would scroll back through my log and see all the stuff I'd done just in the past week. And that feeling of dread that kind of hung over me as I got started, gone. It's just gone. This sense of imposter syndrome of I can't handle this. I'm getting beat up by this system just dissipated because like, hey, I've done a lot of stuff in the last 4 days. A few weeks after getting underway with this tactic of just logging everything, the latest day goes to the top, push it down, the next day goes above that. All this Mr. OS 10 Sonoma, I don't understand you. You have balloons, hearts, crazy. Okay. Oh, you can't see. I got on the second camera. I did the gesture that made balloons fly up. I don't know what that is. But after like about a month of adopting this process, I would go back, I would sift through. And one time I sat there and like just scrolled for like 5 minutes or something. I'm just like, man, I've gotten a lot of stuff done. And then I realized, duh. The next time he comes by and asks for feedback, next time he comes by and says, what's the big stuff you've done? I'm going to say, can I get back to you in an hour? Can you give me 1 hour? I would go back, I'd sift through, I would open up a side document and I would, hey, that's good. Let me write that down. That's good. Let me write that down. That's good. I could gather 5 to 10 bullet points like that. Awesome. I realized I was building the log that I needed. I was not depending on my manager to gather my evidence. I was gathering my evidence, and I was trying to feed it to him as fast as I could, as effectively as I could. And in the process, we were having regular meetings. Again, not because I was on one of these PPE plans, what have you, that where it's like you're at risk for getting dropped. It's no, I want to get ahead. I don't want to get to that point. I want to get ahead of that point. And so I would sit there and we'd meet and we talk about it. And the whole point is he is meeting with management from time to time. Management is saying, this is what we need. This is what the team, this is the direction the team's heading. And he's telling me this is the stuff that needs to happen. This is the stuff where he's not telling me what to do. He's telling me what's needed and he's leaving it up to me to implement it. Okay. He's defining the requirements and he's letting me implement them. And for it may sound weird, but it was kind of hands off. It was like he would say repeatedly to me in meetings, hey, I trust you. I know you can do this. I'm just sharing the feedback with you. And something else, he was honest and upfront about is that, if any of your other leaders come and they can come to him and ask for feedback, or they can bring feedback to him. So he would share feedback with me. I could share feedback with him, and other leaders could come to him. So he stood there and said, hey, if the task leader comes to me and wants feedback, it's my duty to give it to him. I just want to share and be upfront. This is how it works. So suffice it to say, about 6 to 9 months of this process, I had signaled I'll start logging everything. I'm going to start tracking stuff. Part of the tracking, because on some days it would seem like I would spend all day and have one thing on that record. And I'd think that's not enough. It's not enough flair. You may see Office Space where they go, you're not wearing enough flair. It kind of felt like that on some days. Some days it felt like I don't have enough flair on my record. Oh, people like the clock. Yeah. Hey, Greg, in Serbia, the same time like on your clock. Yeah, I have I can put this up here. Over here, I have local time up here, but then I have UTC time at the bottom one. It's a little ham radio gimmick. Oh, this is crazy. All right. Let me take the comments down. All right. So about 6 to 9 months in or so, I mean with my manager, get feedback, and basically it's somewhere, I don't have the exact time frame, but it's been several months. I've been working at this. I would look on a days, I'm not getting enough. I'm going to stop and I'm a little buried in, because I'm in a deep think exercise. There's somebody's opened a feature request. I'm reading it. It's complicated. I'm not sure where to proceed. I just thought, I don't know, my brain's tired out. I can't noodle my way through this one. So why don't I just go to the last page of the tickets for spring dated JP? Let me just look at the last page, because that's the oldest tickets. And I look on there and I looked at the ticket and I read it. It wasn't complicated. And I read that and I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. I just know that's not going to happen. So I put a comment, I dispositioned the ticket, and I closed it and put it in the log. And then I went to the next ticket. I read it. It was some sort of request or issue or what have you. And I knew that was not an issue anymore. That had been solved or whatever. I'd go find the related ticket. I would link it and I would close it. And I just started going through that. I started grooming the backlog, digging through the tickets and resolving that. And you know what? That was cool. That was almost a relief. It's the counterpart to thinking hard on a complex problem. And instead, let's clean up the backlog. Let's solve that issue. Let's close out old tickets. And I would close out 5 tickets that day. And I would find it, in a sense, it would rejuvenate my brain, because it let my brain take a break. And strangely, sometimes when your brain gets a break, gets to rest, it's still subconsciously working on stuff. Sometimes I would get the ideas for stuff and be able to circle back to it. But over the next few weeks, I kind of affected that. And maybe it was 6 weeks worth of effort, but eventually I had closed 5 pages of tickets, stuff that wasn't going to happen. Thankfully, this was after they'd instituted the tool, which was monitoring ticket openings and ticket closings. I mean, what program management team doesn't want to track issue closure, issue management? So I knew on the graphs there was all this, curve of stuff coming out. And then I knew it would show tickets closed, tickets resolved. And it's not closed because it's just too old. No, I was able to actually disposition them properly. I was able to look at stuff and say, that's just not going to happen that way. And I would put the feedback on there. If somebody wanted to contest that, they're free to come in and post follow-up comments. You can come put more in there. Anybody could come circle back to join it. But some of these tickets are 10 years old. The original poster wasn't even around. Why should that clog up our schedule with stuff to do? So what I did was I went and assembled a bullet list. One bullet point item was closed 46 tickets. You can sit there and think from a surface level, what kind of metric is that? A software engineer is not measured by how many tickets he closes. That's true. Our efforts are not just how many tickets did you close, how many codes of line did you write. It's not these surface level metrics, but what it does represent as part of a more cohesive package is that, okay, part of what this staff engineer did is he processed 46 old tickets. He implemented 5 new features. He did these kind of upgrades based upon Hibernate. He responded to it's a comprehensive message about what was accomplished. And so what I found was, gee, if I just keep a journal of what I'm doing, I don't have to depend on my memory. I noticed it beats the imposter syndrome, kicks it out the door. Because now I could look, I think at the point when I left Broadcom, VMware Broadcom, what have you, when I left that log had reached 80 pages, 80 pages. And guess what? I've started a new one here at Cockroach Labs. I'm doing it here too. I'm trying to put my money where my mouth is because it's something I put in that book, which go to 12rules.io and grab a copy and I talk about it in there. Now, we said we're talking about promotions and stuff. And so the first thing I wanted you to understand is, are you gathering the evidence? I want you to understand the process that's happening. Okay. So your manager has to go to an annual meeting. Their job isn't to rant on you. Their job is to defend you. You need to collect and gather the evidence and give it to them. And you know what helps you gather the evidence? If you're meeting with your manager on some regular basis. Because what if I went and spent all this time and effort closing tickets, but I wasn't working on this other feature that upper management needed, and I never talked with my manager? My manager never gets the chance to say, hey, that's neat, but they don't need it. They need you to focus on this instead. This is more vital. So part of the conversation when this all started, when this issue went down, when I discovered that I wasn't pulling my weight, in the beginning of all that, I didn't realize it. I thought, okay, I'm just ramping up. It's kind of the way it goes. And one of my first conversations with my manager when he'd stepped into that role was, well, I've been here for a while at this level. Can we talk about promotion? Can we, discuss what's needed to have a promotion? Which raises the question, have you even talked to your manager about what you need to do to get a promotion? Well, my manager went and found the guidelines that they had for the company at the time to look at them, but he brought it to my attention that was like, well, we're kind of having this issue with your performance on that. And I was like, issue? What, there's an issue? And that was a bit of a revelation for me to realize. I didn't realize I was sinking, but once it was pointed out to me, then I could see it. But I want to talk about so I've talked about what you have to gather the evidence and bring it to your manager for being able to get the merit increases, but how does that feed the promotion? Well, it's a lot of a similar thing. It's very analogous to that. There's still the meeting of the managers, the manager and manager meeting, whatever you want to call that. Now, let me back up because I did talk about why they have these stackings, how they have this big pile of money. They have to divvy it up between everybody in the department in some way. Whether you like it or not, they do that. Let me describe some of the math that's at play, okay? There's a thing out there called a salary band. Basically, everybody in a department is has a particular level or a title that they have. You can call it level 1 software engineer. That's what they have at one shop. Very easy. They typically have some kind of numbering, or even if they have a name for that, like senior member of technical staff, usually there's some number designator in their database for it. They may call that L5 or something like that, or L4 or something like that. There's a number to go with it. But basically, everybody that's at that pay level has some kind of base pay. You have the minimum person all the way, the person with the lowest pay all the way to the upper, and it's a range. They call that a salary band, okay? Let's imagine the lowest person is making 80,000 and the highest person is making 92,000. 80 to 92,000. That is the salary band, okay? What that tells you is that in this particular level, the odds of them coming to you and saying, we're going to give you a merit, we're going to increase your pay to 96,000, probably not going to happen, because if the range is 80 to 92, if they give you a raise above the 92, the whole salary band shifts upward. They don't want to do that. Greg, why don't they want to do that? How come they're not willing to just do that? Because it means their entire burn rate has gone up. Their average burn rate that they have to go up to the very upper echelons of management has gone up. So here's the deal. You want to know something called the midpoint. Where is the middle of the salary band? Now, the example I gave was 80,000 to 92,000. That's a $12,000 spread. Just cut that in half and say 6,000. The midpoint is 86,000. Why is this important to know? You need to know where your pay is in relation to the midpoint. So that's why it maybe the first conversation you need to have with your manager is, can I see the salary band and where am I in the midpoint with regards to the midpoint? Because here's the deal. Here's something to know from a mathematical perspective, an economic mathematical perspective, is if your pay rate is below that midpoint, in this example, 86,000, if your pay rate is below the midpoint, it's a lot easier for them to give you a merit increase. It doesn't have that big of an effect on the aggregate salary band sliding up, okay? I heard a former group leader that I knew from early in my career describe it like this. The midpoint is like if you imagine the ocean, it's the surface of the ocean. Okay. Where you are is a beach ball. If you're below the midpoint, you're underwater. Okay. There's pressure, buoyant pressure pushing you up to the midpoint. Okay. There's a ever increasing pressure to get you up there. Okay. Because it's the nature of the beast. The chances are here's the risk if they don't give you any kind of merit increase at all. The risk is you're going to walk out the door into the arms of one of their competitors. So they need to give you something. They want to give you some form of merit increase. Otherwise, you may walk out the door and join a competitor. And what happens after that? Not only is your knowledge and skill set with a competitor, they now have to spend the time and effort to hire your replacement, or they're going to have to give all your tasking to somebody else. Neither of those is favorable. So they want to give you some kind of increase. Okay. But here's the thing. Remember the beach ball? The beach ball in the ocean? What happens when you're above the midpoint? Well, there's no more pressure. The buoyant pressure is gone. Okay. When you get above the midpoint, there's now a risk. It's harder to get you a merit increase. The merit increases are harder to come by, because now you're at the point where every merit increase is starting to push the salary band. They can go derive how much they're willing to let the salary band move up in a given year, but they're trying to control that and retain that. Okay. So what happens is, as your salary moves to the upper edges of the salary band, the pressure mounts to say, well, instead of giving this guy another merit increase, we could promote him instead into another salary band where he's below the midpoint for that one. Let me restate that, because that may have sounded a little confusing. Okay. In a given salary band, when you're below the midpoint, it's not hard for them to give you a little bit that moves you toward the midpoint. But once you're past it, the pressure begins to mount to promote you into another salary band where you're below the midpoint of that one. Okay. And this is where, if you can see where you are on the midpoint, If you're below the midpoint, the thing is, the odds are they're probably not ready to promote you. They're going to look at that and say you're not ready for that yet. Okay. So it may not be time for your promotion if that's where you are, and that's fine. But if you're above the midpoint, you need to start asking your manager questions like, I'm a level 1 engineer. What do I need to do to get to level 2? And you know what? That question is perfectly fine. You can ask your manager, what do I need to be doing? Because the guise of that is, what do I need to be doing to serve this company? Now, if you're a solo entrepreneur just working for yourself, a lot of this doesn't really matter. Okay. But I'm going to assume probably you or your odds are that's not you. So it's okay to ask your manager, what do I need to be doing? And it should be under the sense of, what does a level 2 engineer do? What are a level 2 engineer's responsibilities? And you should be thinking, where can I get that? What does it mean to be level 2? It means I don't always wait for assignments to come to me. Level 2 engineers reach out and ask for assignments from their tech leader. Are you doing that? One of the things I was looking at is, what is it to make it to staff 2, for example? Staff 2 means you need to be you need to be a project leader. You need to be leading projects. I was sitting there trying to converse with my manager on what are other projects that I need to pick up and run with. I think that was part of the reason they came to me and said, okay, Greg, you've been at staff 1 for a while. In order to climb to staff 2, you probably need to be managing a bigger project. I had been running Spring Web Services for years, but as popular as that awesome technology is, it's not as big as Spring Data JPA. And they said, let's put him there. Also, Greg's got the skill set for that. He knows relational databases, and I'm sure he can adjust to Hibernate. So basically, have the conversation with your manager. What does it take to make it? What is a level 2? So it's not, what are you going to do to give me level 2? What's the slimmest stuff? What's the minimum stuff I could do to qualify for that? No. What does a level 2 do? What can I be doing to demonstrate that is me? Because the idea in all this is to demonstrate your value to others. You need to be looking for opportunities to demonstrate value. Okay. So you need to demonstrate value. I just talked about that. And what I was mentioning earlier is your value needs to be aligned with the company's values. And that's why talking to your manager, who is talking to senior management, is getting where the alignment is. Your manager should be able to bring to you the kind of assignments that align your efforts with senior management's. That's the point. If you want to get merit increases and you want to get promotions and things of that kind, you need to be generating the value, and your value needs to align with senior management's, with the program office, if you will. That is the secret in all this stuff. And that's how you figure it out, by communicating with your manager. You don't want to wait for good fortune to come your way. I remember seeing somebody that had been at level 3 in a particular company for years and really never conversed, and they eventually got a level 4. But I feel like if you go start the conversation, it can happen sooner. If you start the thing and figure out what you need to be doing, you can figure out what actions you need to take. There's this one particular person who's a new grad that I had hired when I was a tech leader and a group leader. Now, for the record, this person never came to me and said, what do I need to be doing to get promoted? I never saw that. But this was somebody, I walked into the meeting and was at the top of my stack in this first year. I proverbially played the card. We weren't using index cards or anything of the kind, but I was able to share that. Everybody in the department knew this guy from what he accomplished. Okay. It was a no-brainer. He ended up in first position, basically. So he got a huge increase. It actually moved him past the midpoint. Okay. The next year, I went to the same meeting. This person was still working for me, still the top of his league. I was able to go play him at the top, and there was still no argument, but he was above the midpoint. His merit increase was not as big. Okay. Remember what I talked about? When you're above the midpoint, the increases are smaller. It still moved him to the top of the department. And at that point, I knew he was either going to get little to no merit increase at that point, because he was really way at the top of the salary band. And I realized this person's earned a promotion. I could see, now I understand it. This person is clearly qualified for promotion. So I had to go check that company's handbook, because what you also find is not only is the salary band calculation a piece of all this, but depending on what level you're promoting to, they have additional criteria. At that company, to get from level 1 to level 2, you needed a minimum of 3 years. That was another criteria. So in the 3rd year, the way it timed, I was able to essentially start writing his promotion packet. And because I was his group leader, I got to do that. And that was a real privilege of mine. I was able to get this person promoted. So I took that. The promotion package took a little convincing on that front. And this is the idea. If you are generating the value that the company, if you're generating lots of value for the company, if you're aligning your efforts with what the management office is looking for, and if you're at the top of a salary band, promotion is going to be almost effortless. Now, I need to hedge this with, nothing here is guaranteed. It also depends on, a company also has other limits, like we only have so many, or so they may have a proportion, like 60% are level 1s and 30% are level 2, something like that. I'm just making those numbers up. But I'd actually worked at a company that had 5 levels of software engineers. What I didn't know is they actually had something called a level 6 software engineer. But this is a company with like 3,000 software engineers, and they only had like 1 or 2 of those max in the entire company. One of those level 6s I had known from one contract when I went out to work in Colorado Springs and was trying to settle into my apartment. Actually stayed with the guy in his apartment. He had apartment he was had on short-term rental, and he had a spare bedroom, so they let me stay there. So I got to interact with this person. It's really sharp, very keen awareness of the entire industry. And somebody else was on I had known about was, I'd worked on this particular contract before I left to go join the spring team. And it was a couple years before I left that this other guy got promoted to level 6. And at the point when you're like level 5 or level 6, you're really not writing software anymore. You're directing legions of other software developers and sharing experience and stuff. So in that situation, it's not really anything. Has nothing to do with salary bands, if you will. I mean, you need to be outranking everybody else in a sense, but then it may be several years before something opens up and you really make it into that. But I've talked with many people in this industry, and what I've been able to glean is that more or less what I'm describing is kind of universal. It's in one form or another, it's sort of happening across the industry. So what I'm sharing with you isn't something that only works if you work at that particular company. It's fundamental if you think about it. But I knew somebody that worked at another company that to get to level 4, all the other level 4s had to agree with that. So in other words, you sort of have to sell your talent set, your value creating ability to all the other level 4s at that company, for example. And that's how you get promoted. Because if you think about it, you're working for a business. The business's job is they're trying to make money. They're trying to build products that people want. And so the people they want to promote are the ones that bring the most value. Somebody else that I knew had succeeded very well was somebody that knew how to bring in business. This person was an engineer nonetheless, but they understood the concept of business very well and was very good at reaching out to customers, at providing the customers with value, sort of an external thing. So he wasn't helping other engineers as much as he was connecting with the customers and generating new contracts and new business. And I mean, this is part of the thing when you move from a junior engineer to a senior engineer, is when you start to understand that the engineering, writing code, building systems, that's all cool, but they serve a purpose, and it's to bring business value, to value to the business. And if there is no business, there's no engineering. And when you start to understand this concept, that's a sign that you're no longer a junior developer. And this is, an important thing that I like to bring to your awareness, because, I'm hoping you're coming here to learn how to be a savvy pro coder and a savvy pro coder. You're not a hobbyist. This isn't your weekend fun time. You're not just slathering code together because it's cute. You're wanting to build this as your career. You're wanting to grow your talents. And I can tell you to climb that ladder, to be given more responsibilities, bigger things to manage. It's more than just writing if-then clauses or hammering out class files or something like that. There's more to it than that. And so I want to understand what it means to be a pro coder. Now, I want to thank you for coming here to the Pro Coder Show. And if you're watching this on streaming, you can also catch it on the podcast at podcast.procoder.io. So I want you to subscribe there. And if you're getting value out of this, smash the like button. And what I want you to do is go out there and be professional.
This episode is over, but your code writing journey continues. Visit procoder.io to find links and resources to help you become a pro coder.